My name is Zoe, and if I had to pinpoint the moment my life took a sharp turn, it would be when I met Jasper. We connected effortlessly at the accounting firm where we both worked, and before long we were planning a wedding. I was ecstatic, but there was one hurdle I hadn't anticipated: meeting his family. Jasper often spoke about his mother, Mrs. Dalton, with deep respect and admiration. So when the evening arrived for our first dinner at his childhood home, I was a bundle of nerves. I kept smoothing down my simple blue dress, checking my reflection for what felt like the 100th time. "Relax, Zoe. She's going to love you," Jasper reassured me as we drove. But the moment we stepped inside, I felt the weight of Mrs. Dalton's gaze. Her eyes traveled over me, a flicker of something unreadable in them before she finally spoke. "Well, you're certainly slender, aren't you?" Her tone was cool, assessing. I forced a small laugh, trying to brush it off. "I guess so. I've never been much of an eater." She hummed in response, her expression impassive. "I hope you're taking care of yourself. A woman should have some robustness, you know." Jasper, ever my defender, interjected, "Mom, Zoe's fine. She's healthy." Dinner was far from comfortable. I could feel Mrs. Dalton's eyes on me the entire time, scrutinizing every bite I took. Every movement felt judged, and it became harder to swallow my food under her unrelenting gaze. The worst part came when I excused myself to use the restroom. As I passed the living room, I heard her hushed voice speaking to her sister. "She looks sickly. How will she bear Jasper's healthy children?" The words hit me like a blow to the stomach. My appetite vanished, my stomach churned, and for the rest of the evening I barely touched my plate. Still, I forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong. The drive home was quiet. Jasper glanced at me, sensing my unease. "Hey, you okay? You've been quiet since dinner." I exhaled slowly. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But inside, I was anything but fine. Mrs. Dalton's words lingered, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, a long road of judgment and disapproval. And I had no idea just how much worse it would get. As the weeks passed, dinner invitations from Mrs. Dalton became a regular occurrence. Each visit felt less like a family gathering and more like a test. Jasper, ever the optimist, kept assuring me that things would improve. But the opposite was true. One evening stands out vividly in my memory. When we arrived, the dining table was overflowing with an extravagant spread, thick gravies, rich roasts, buttery sides, and decadent dishes, all meticulously arranged. As soon as we sat down, Mrs. Dalton wasted no time. "Zoe, you look even thinner than last time. You really should eat more," she remarked, heaping an overwhelming portion of food onto my plate. I hesitated, my stomach already twisting. "Oh, Mrs. Dalton, this is really too much. I don't think I can." "Nonsense," she interrupted briskly. "You need to build some strength, dear. Especially if you and Jasper are thinking about a family." I forced a polite smile and took a small bite. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face, as if she had won some unspoken battle. I glanced at Jasper, hoping for some support, but he only offered a helpless shrug. Frustration bubbled up inside me. The richness of the food, combined with the weight of her unspoken criticisms, made it impossible to eat comfortably. Dinner dragged on painfully. Mrs. Dalton continued to push more food my way, passing comments with every bite I took, or didn't take. "You know, Zoe, a good wife should be able to cook hearty meals. It's important for a family." The implication was clear. I swallowed hard, my voice steady but firm. "I do cook, Mrs. Dalton. I just prefer healthier meals." She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Healthy is fine, but this," she gestured toward my barely touched plate, "this is just pickiness. You're setting a bad example." By the time the meal ended, I was both nauseous and seething. The drive home was thick with tension. I could no longer hold back. "Jasper, your mom's comments are really hurtful. It's like she's always judging me." He was silent for a few moments before responding carefully. "I know, Zoe. I'll talk to her, okay? I'm sure she doesn't mean it the way it sounds." But deep down, I doubted anything would change. Mrs. Dalton had made her feelings about me painfully clear. And with every passing dinner, that sense of inadequacy only grew stronger. Mrs. Dalton's words grew sharper with each passing meal, her gaze scrutinizing my every move. "Zoe, are you deliberately avoiding my food? You hardly eat anything I make." I struggled to find the right words, hoping to soften the truth. "It's not that, Mrs. Dalton. Your cooking is wonderful, but it's very rich. Sometimes it just doesn't sit well with me." She let out an unimpressed sigh, shaking her head. "A little discomfort never hurt anyone. You need to eat more, put on some weight." It's not healthy to be so thin. Her words lingered long after dinner ended, settling in my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. Each meal at her house felt more like a test than a gathering, and the thought of sitting through another filled me with quiet dread. My relationship with Jasper was strong, yet the presence of his mother's disapproval cast a shadow over us. Night after night, I lay awake, wondering how much longer I could endure the constant scrutiny. The physical discomfort after every meal mirrored the deeper ache growing inside me, a reminder that no matter what I did, I would never quite fit into her expectations. I felt like an outsider, my place in Jasper's world never truly secure. The more time passed, the more suffocating her judgment became. Her constant remarks about my weight, the way she monitored my plate with disapproving glances, it was all becoming too much. So I made a choice. One that I knew she wouldn't take lightly. I stopped going to dinner at their house. The next time Jasper brought it up, I hesitated. "Jasper, I don't think I can go tonight." His brows furrowed. "Why not?" "Mom's making that roast you always liked." I took a steadying breath before answering. "It's not about the food. It's about how she makes me feel. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." Disappointment flashed across his face. "Zoey, she's just trying to be caring in her own way. She doesn't mean to upset you." I shook my head, frustration welling up. "Caring? It doesn't feel like that, Jasper. It feels like I'm constantly under attack. She's always commenting on my body, what I eat, how I look. I can't keep subjecting myself to that." We left the conversation unfinished, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to keep the peace, but I needed him to see the toll this was taking on me. Skipping dinner once was all it took to trigger a confrontation. The next day my phone rang. Mrs. Dalton's voice was unmistakably cold. "Zoey, I noticed you didn't join us for dinner last night. Is everything all right?" I forced my voice to remain neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Dalton. I just wasn't feeling up to it." A sharp inhale came through the phone. "Not feeling up to it? Surely you realize it's quite rude to refuse a family dinner without a valid reason. You're supposed to be part of this family now, or so I thought." The sting of her words was immediate, and something inside me snapped. "With all due respect, Mrs. Dalton, being part of this family shouldn't mean constantly being criticized." A brief silence followed before her voice, laced with indignation, returned. "Criticism? I'm simply concerned about your well-being. A wife should be strong, healthy. I worry that you're not suitable for Jasper." The comment struck a nerve. "Suitable? I love Jasper, and he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion of my health." The conversation ended shortly after, but the damage was already done. The distance between us grew, the tension thickening with every passing day. Jasper, caught in the crossfire, attempted to mediate, but his efforts only seemed to make things worse. One evening, as we sat together in our living room, he finally spoke up. "Zoey, I talked to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Avoiding her? She's done nothing but judge me since the day we met. What does she expect?" Jasper raked a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "She's my mom, Zoey. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two at least try to work things out?" I met his gaze, my emotions a mix of anger and sadness. "Jasper, this isn't about working things out. It's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend it doesn't hurt. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And in many ways it was. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows felt sacred. Jasper looked at me like I was the only person in the world. But then at the reception everything changed. I remember standing there, a glass of wine in my hand. The same wine everyone else was drinking. The wine had a strange taste, but I brushed it off as nerves. I took another sip, unaware it would be my last clear memory before waking up in a stark white hospital room. Disoriented and groggy, I attempted to sit up, but my body felt unbearably heavy. That's when I heard them, Jasper and his mother, their voices just outside my door. Mrs. Dalton's tone was sharp, laced with unmistakable judgment. "See what I mean, Jasper? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family." Her words hit me like a blow, but I was too weak to respond. Jasper's voice was strained with frustration. "Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened." I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I wasn't weak, but my voice barely rose above a whisper. The door creaked open and a doctor stepped in, his face unreadable. He addressed me directly, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Dalton, you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony?" A wave of confusion washed over me. My head felt cloudy, but I knew the answer. No, nothing, I managed weakly. Just the wine. The doctor's brow furrowed. The wine? That's strange. No one else had this reaction. Jasper's concern deepened. Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink? The doctor hesitated. It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run further tests. I lay there in stunned silence, my mind racing. Someone had drugged me? On my wedding day. But why? And more importantly, who? As the doctor left to make arrangements, Jasper came to my side, taking my hand in his. Zoe, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice tight with emotion. I can't believe this is happening. I tried to reassure him with a small smile, but my mind was in turmoil. The bitter aftertaste of the wine still lingered on my tongue, mingling with the even more bitter memory of Mrs. Dalton's words. That night in the hospital, sleep refused to come. The realization that someone had deliberately hurt me was chilling. And the worst part? Not knowing who was responsible. Jasper sat beside me, slumped in an uncomfortable chair, his breathing slow and steady. I envied his ability to rest. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love, our commitment. Instead, it ended with suspicion, fear, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Returning home from the hospital did little to ease my nerves. The knowledge that someone had drugged me at my own wedding hung over me like a dark cloud, refusing to dissipate. And deep down, a gnawing suspicion took root. One evening, unable to keep it bottled up any longer, I turned to Jasper as we sat on the couch, the television playing a show neither of us were paying attention to. My hands felt clammy, my heart pounding. Jasper, I said, my voice unsteady. I need to talk to you about something serious. He muted the TV, his expression shifting to concern. What is it? I swallowed hard, trying to gather the courage to say it aloud. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it. His entire expression changed in an instant. He stiffened, his eyes narrowing. What? Zoe, that's ridiculous. Why would you even think that? Frustration welled up inside me. Think about it, Jasper. The way she constantly comments on me, how she's always finding something wrong. And then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted off? It's not impossible. Jasper pushed himself off the couch, pacing the room. Zoe, you're accusing my mom. She may be harsh, but she wouldn't do something like that. This is insane. I stood as well, my voice rising. Is it? Or have you just been ignoring how she treats me? You know she doesn't like me, Jasper. That's not my imagination. He stopped pacing, his jaw tight with tension. This is serious, Zoe. You're talking about drugging someone, that's a crime. You can't just throw around accusations without proof. Tears stung my eyes. I thought you'd at least listen to me, at least consider the possibility. But it seems like no matter what she does, you'll always take her side. Jasper exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. It's not about taking sides. It's about being rational. We need facts, not suspicions. Anger and disappointment swirled inside me. So what do you expect me to do? Pretend it didn't happen? He stepped forward, trying to place a comforting hand on my arm, but I pulled away. We need to think this through, he said, his voice softer now. Maybe we should talk to the police again, see if they've found anything new. I nodded, though my gut told me the truth was right in front of us. Fine, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. We'll talk to them. But deep down I knew, if it turned out I was right, if Mrs. Dalton was behind this, I wasn't sure how we would come back from it. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in endless circles. Mrs. Dalton's words, her looks, the way she always seemed to have something just on the tip of her tongue but never quite said it, everything gnawed at me. Doubt and fear settled deep inside, like poison spreading through my veins. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A few weeks had passed since the hospital incident, and then came the invitation. Another family gathering at Mrs. Dalton's house. I hesitated, every instinct in me screaming to decline. But Jasper insisted. We should go, he said. It'll show we're still united. So I agreed, though unease curled in my stomach as we stepped through her front door. The atmosphere was thick, ice trailing me the moment we entered. I could hear the hushed whispers, feel the weight of unspoken words pressing in around me. Mrs. Dalton greeted us with a smile, but there was something about it, too polished, too controlled. "Zoe dear, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice laced with a sweetness that didn't quite ring true. I forced a polite smile. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Dalton." Dinner was served soon after. I noticed immediately she had prepared a separate dish just for me. "I made this especially for you, Zoe," she said, setting the plate down in front of me. "Considering your delicate condition." The emphasis on delicate was not lost on me. I stared at the plate. It looked normal, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't willing to trust anything she placed in front of me. Across the table, Jasper was already eating, unaware of my growing discomfort. I poked at the food with my fork, my appetite gone. Mrs. Dalton watched me, her expression unreadable, before tilting her head ever so slightly. "Not hungry, Zoe? I went through quite the effort to make this just for you." I lifted my gaze to meet hers, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm just not feeling all that well, but thank you." The murmurs around the table grew louder. The judgment in the air was palpable, pressing down on me from all sides. Sensing my unease, Jasper leaned in. "You okay?" I gave a small nod, though my mind was already made up. I wasn't taking the risk. Lowering my voice, I whispered, "Can we switch plates? I don't feel comfortable eating this." He looked confused but shrugged and obliged, sliding my plate toward himself. Just as he reached for his first bite, Mrs. Dalton's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "No, Jasper, don't," she exclaimed, panic flooding her voice. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes was now locked onto her. Jasper froze, his fork still hovering over the plate. "Mom," he asked, his voice cautious. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Dalton's face had gone pale. She stammered, searching for an explanation. It's just. That dish was made especially for Zoe," she insisted. It's not to everyone's taste." A chill ran down my spine. I stared at her, the last piece of the puzzle sliding into place. "Why not, Mrs. Dalton?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What's in it that's so special?" She faltered, her usual composure slipping. "It's just a special recipe." Silence thickened in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. Jasper looked between his mother and me, the realization dawning in his eyes. His voice, once filled with doubt, now carried something different, an edge of disbelief and anger. "Mom, what did you do?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. But I knew. There was something in that food. Something she didn't want Jasper to eat. The room remained deathly quiet. I could feel every pair of eyes shifting between Mrs. Dalton and me, the unspoken accusations filling the space between us. She looked trapped, her hands twitching slightly as if searching for an escape. Jasper's voice broke through the silence, a raw mix of anger and confusion. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Zoe's food?" Mrs. Dalton, always so composed, was now visibly unraveling. "It's nothing," she tried, her voice shaky. "It was just made for Zoe, not for you." I clenched my fists. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Dalton. You've been against me from the start. So tell me, what did you put in my food?" Murmurs spread like wildfire around the table. Mrs. Dalton's eyes darted from face to face, realizing she had no allies in the room. "I didn't put anything in your food, Zoe," she said, but the conviction in her voice was gone. "This is ridiculous." I pushed my chair back, standing on shaky legs. "It's not ridiculous," I snapped. "Ever since I started coming here, I felt sick after dinner. Then at the wedding someone drugged my drink. And now this." I gestured at the untouched plate in front of Jasper. "It's not a coincidence." Jasper stood too, his voice firmer than before. "Mom, if you did anything to Zoe's food, you need to tell us now. This isn't a joke." Mrs. Dalton's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Jasper." Jasper stiffened. "Protect me? She's not right for you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She's weak, sickly, she's not one of us." A hot wave of anger surged through me. My voice trembled as I spoke. "Protect him? By making me sick? By drugging me?" Gasps rippled through the table. The air had shifted. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was something far darker. From the far end of the table, Jasper's uncle, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. His voice was calm, yet heavy with something unreadable. "Well," he said, leaning forward, "it seems we have a lot to discuss. This is a serious accusation, Zoe. Do you have any proof?" The words came from across the table, weighted with skepticism. I didn't hesitate. "I do. I gestured toward the untouched plate before me. I'm calling the police. They'll examine the food Mrs. Dalton prepared. Before I could even reach for my phone, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head in her hands, her entire body shaking. I just wanted the best for my son, she sobbed. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier. Her confession hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. Jasper's face drained of all color. He stared at his mother as if she were a stranger. You did this to Zoe? My wife. His voice cracked, filled with disbelief and heartbreak. I felt a strange mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced, but despair at the cost. Our relationship, our place in this family, it was all in ruins. The rest of the evening blurred into chaos. Some family members rushed to Mrs. Dalton's side, some turned away in disgust, while others argued in hushed, urgent voices. Disbelief clashed with outrage. There were whispers, accusations, shifting allegiances. Jasper and I left before the night was over. The weight of everything bore down on us as we drove home in silence. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The quiet between us wasn't comforting, it was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and lingering questions. What would happen now? Could we move past this? What did this mean for our future? That night, as I lay in bed, the events replayed in my mind, Mrs. Dalton's confession, the shattered look on Jasper's face, the murmurs of disbelief that had followed. The truth had come to light, but it had left wounds that I wasn't sure could ever truly heal. A few days passed before Jasper and I finally addressed what came next. One evening, as we sat side by side in the living room, the silence between us felt different, more final, more certain. I turned to him, my voice steady. We need to talk about what happens now. About the police. Jasper looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. I've been thinking about that too, he admitted. It's your decision, Zoe. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of it pressing down on me. It's not just about reporting what happened, I said slowly. It's about dragging all of this into the open, making it a public matter. It feels like opening Pandora's box. He nodded. I get it. But you're the one who was wronged. If you want to take legal action, I'll be there with you. I let out a deep breath. No, I said at last. I don't think I want to go down that road. A pause. Then I turned to him again, feeling my heart race as I spoke the words that had been forming in my mind for days. But there's something else I have decided. I hesitated, gathering the strength to say it. I can't see your mother again, Jasper. My voice wavered but didn't break. After everything, I can't. Jasper didn't react right away. He sat there thinking, absorbing it. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I understand, he said. And honestly, I feel the same way. I searched his face, waiting for hesitation, for reluctance. There was none. After what she did, I can't just act like it never happened. I won't see her either. His words settled something inside me. I had been bracing for resistance, but instead I found validation. It's going to be hard, I murmured. She's your mother. He reached for my hand, squeezing it with certainty. I know. But what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship comes first. And I knew he meant it. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Cutting Mrs. Dalton out of our lives left behind a strange emptiness, a void where a relationship should have been. There were moments of doubt, times when the finality of it all hit hard, when we questioned whether we were being too harsh. But we leaned on each other. We reminded ourselves why we had made this choice. And slowly we started to rebuild. We focused on us, on what we wanted for our future. Weekend getaways, quiet nights curled up on the couch, making new traditions that had nothing to do with the past. We found joy in the small things, in the moments that were ours. As painful as the ordeal had been, it had proven something important. We had faced a test, one that had shaken the very foundation of our relationship. And yet we had come out of it stronger.